Well, here we are again, folks. Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. We have devoted these last 5 or 6 of the year 2017. We have devoted the first few of these to the beginning, the Old Testament beginning in the book of Genesis, meaning the beginning. This is the first. Now, the verses 1 through 11 of chapter 1, in these 11 verses, we find the origin of all things, and 1 and 2, 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest. So we found that in here. And then we found in Genesis 3 through 5, we found the sin of Adam, and Genesis 3 through 5, the subtlety of Satan. We find the sin of Adam, the redemption of God, and the martyrdom of Abel. Remember, Cain killed Abel. He was the first martyr. Why was he killed? Because he was religious, and the devil didn't want that religion, so he kills the man, thinking he's going to get away with it and get rid of it, but it didn't work. And the mystery of Enoch coming in to represent the place of Abel. Now, what were the conditions? The conditions were, or the condemnation, of the things that happened on the world. So a flood had to be taken place in Genesis 6 through 9. And the conditions before the flood, salvation through the flood, and the tragedy after the flood. And then we find confusion. This is the tragedy after the flood. The Tower of Babel, Genesis 10 and 11. The arrogance of mankind. Man became arrogant. And the judgment of God against that arrogancy of mankind. And the origin of nations. Now we see nations are going to come into play. And God's going to allow that. See, God started the first man, and all mankind after that is after that first man, showing us that it doesn't take very long to fill this earth with people. A very short time can fill this earth with people. A couple of thousand years, and this earth is completely wrapped up. We see the first heaven. Let's talk about the heavens. There's 3 heavens. The first heaven is the home of the birds and the clouds, the heaven you and I see. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof was much, and in it was meat for all. The beast of the field had showered under it, and the fowls of the heaven had dwelt in the boughs of the trees thereof, and all the flesh was fed of it. In Daniel 4 and 12. We see, behold, the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather in barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are you not much better than they? Matthew 6 and 26. God is saying He actually has more respect, in a sense of the word, for the human being. But the human has rejected Him in such a way that we see it looks like more respect for the birds, because man has to toil and sweat to get what he gets, and the birds of the air already just fly in, and God gives them what they need. And it said, behold, the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? Matthew 6 and 26. Do you know we do perhaps sometimes more sowing and more reaping than we need to do? There is times when we could wait on God. My father believed in living by faith. And I've seen us get to where there wasn't anything to eat in the house, and a knock would come at the door, and a stranger would say, God put it on my heart to bring you folks some groceries. And some groceries came in. Tried faith is good faith. Faith that's not tried is not good faith. Sometimes tried faith has to go to the end, to where you've had nothing more than one day. I recall going to school and carrying a bag that supposedly had a lunch in it that didn't have a lunch in it because we didn't have any food. And we had gone without food for days and hadn't had any food in the house. But I was too embarrassed to let people know we didn't have food, so I didn't let people know we didn't have food. And it was not uncommon to go without food when I was young. And it became not a real necessity to have a lot of food. I can remember one winter, we had a russet apple tree in front of the house. That's a late apple that comes in real late in the northern part of the United States. And it was loaded. We got barrels and barrels of apples and put them in the basement. And we had those apples. I remember we had baked apples, we had stewed apples, we had fried apples, we had raw apples. When the barrel got low enough, when I ate an apple, I ate seeds and all, core and all, and then chewed the stem for gum. And that's talking about being down to where there's not a lot of food. When there's not a lot of food, you don't waste anything. We don't realize today what we throw away as Americans is edible for many families. We didn't have a government program in those days. We had a work program, and if you couldn't get out for the snow and the ice and work, I remember the summers in 53, 52, 53, where the snow was 6 feet deep, 7 feet deep, and you couldn't go. If you had a store that was open, you couldn't go to it, and if you could go to it, you didn't have any money to spend in it. So whatever you put away is what you had. If you hadn't canned some food and put some food away, you didn't have it. If you just had some old bought store food and some cans and some boxes of food, you didn't have much. And what you did have, if you had flour, you could have weevils in it, but in that day, you didn't care about the weevils. You ate weevils and all. Nothing mattered that much. A weevil didn't deter you from eating the flour. And so, and of course Mama had a sifter, and she could sift the weevils out. But that's beside the point. The point is this world has not always been what we're in today and what we see today, where America has plenty of food, has plenty of everything. We as personal, as children, the 70-year-old children, like myself, and I'm 76, went through some times that were called depression times, that were hard times. I can remember the little red cardboard piece of thing, looked about the size of a dime, and that was the only way you could get a piece of meat. You couldn't get meat. And by the way, when you went and got the meat, it was horse meat. It was not cow meat. It was the only thing they could come up with was old horses, I guess, from the cavalry, that they killed them off and put meat on the market. And so you could have some horse meat, but it was meat. And I remember those times. I remember those times when Daddy had to go and work in the factory where they made bullets for the World War and the war in the 40s and in the early 50s. And everybody was shut down the factory, turned to factories. My daddy worked in a screen door factory in Portland, Maine. And they revamped that factory and made a factory to make bullets. And then my daddy and mother both worked in that factory making ammunition. That's why Daddy didn't see active duty time, because he was working in the civil service making ammunition for those who were in full-time duty. And I remember that and during those periods of time. So I'm not a man that was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I had to earn everything that I had in my life, and I had to learn everything that I know. And I didn't learn it from a computer. I learned it from the seat of my britches. I learned how to work. I knew that a man had to work if he wanted to eat. I knew that a man had to get out. He had to engineer things. He had to do things. He could not just be a setter. And running water. What was the running water of that day? You ran to the well with a bucket, and you pulled the water up, and you ran back in the house because it's freezing cold, and before the water froze in the bucket. In zero weather. And if the snow was up over the door and you couldn't get a path out to the well, then you didn't have any water. You had to bring snow in the house, which we did. Put on a number 10 wash tub on the stove, and you filled it with snow and you melted it. And you had that snow. The ice cream we had when I was a kid was mixed up snow, and it was ice cream. If you had milk, it sure was good, but very seldom did you have milk when the snow was 6 feet deep and you couldn't get out, which in the 50s, that was not uncommon. And it was not common to have a snowplow. And so if you lived back in the woods where we lived, there was no getting out unless you had snowshoes, and then you couldn't go anywhere if you did. If you got to the store, it wouldn't be open. So the thing about it is times now are different. But I'm going to tell you this. Do whatever you want with your computer. It will not take the place of using the Bible. It will not take the place of getting in this book and studying in this book and getting in a guide like Wilmington's Guide to the Bible. Getting in to what we used through the years when I was young and still now are using the same book, the same principle. The principle has changed dramatically over the years, but also the knowledge has gone downhill. The ability to dig in and read words that are typed, written, printed, and handwritten in cursive. The years are fading away. They're disappearing. They're taking cursive out of the schools. They're taking books out of the schools. They're taking the type of reading and studying that we've done that brought us to where we are. Now what are we doing? We're trying to put away what we're going to have a generation in a couple more years that my generation and the new generation won't be able to talk with each other. The generation out on the street today, right now, that I go talk with, they can't really understand what I say. And I definitely can't understand yo. I don't understand yo. I understand you. I understand they. But I don't understand yo, and I don't understand that what comes behind that yo. Now I can go right out here today and talk with 4 or 5 boys and not understand what they're saying. And they have these computers, and they have computer language. They have half words, half sayings. And they might say to me, my granddaughter might say to me, you know what that means, Grant? No, I don't know what it means. I have no idea what that means because I wasn't raised in this generation. So we've lost a generation, and we're losing a generation. And the bad part of this is the Bible's not being transferred over to where they're getting it. When I talk Bible words to them, just plain out words, beginning. What is that? Oh, that's start. Yeah, that is start. The beginning, that's start. That's where it started. But to convey that today to some of the people that live on this earth today that are stuck in their computer, and then we have this actual reality that's not reality. It's called virtual reality, and it's not virtual reality. It is virtual unreality that you can fly. You put this thing on, like a box on your head that you paid $150 for or $300 for. And you can fly. And you can do everything that's non-reality. There's no reality in it whatsoever. And because there's no reality in it, it's not true. And because it's not true, this generation is being deceived into a false, they're lulled in a way into a false believing that all this stuff could be true and be had. You can't. You will never. Man will never fly. He will never do as the angels do, come and go just by air or whatever. He won't do that because he wasn't made to do that. That's not part of mankind. So here we're going to get back into some real basic Bible today. And we're going to look at some basic Bible things today that come directly from the Bible, from the creation of the Bible to the corruption that took place, to the condemnation that took place, to the confusion of people. And we're getting back into a confused day today, just like in the days of Babylon, when the people all spoke one language. We're getting right now to where people all over the earth can pretty much understand the English language, or the language that England had, that they brought over here to America, and the English took over from the Spanish were here, but we didn't end up with a general population of all Spanish. We ended up with a general population speaking broken language, which is English. The English we speak is not real English, and it's just broken up, and it's getting worse. And like I say, it's getting to a language now where people can't even say the things they need to say. Now look, we saw the first heaven, and this is where the creation took place. And this is also where corruption took place. And this is also where condemnation came in. And then we saw the confusion at the Tower of Babel, where God said, I see that mankind, all speaking one language, can get to all one mind, and their mindset will be, no God for me. We can just make it all work ourselves. So we take God's earth and God's stuff and turn it into private stock and make ourselves the Lord over it and leave God out. And he's the one that makes the stuff grow. You can plant a tomato, but you're not going to get a tomato unless God makes it grow. You can plant anything you want, but you're not going to get it unless God makes it grow. And that's the thing. So we have the first heaven, the home of the birds and the clouds, the leaves, and the fair and the fruit thereof, and much of it was meat for all. We had the beast of the field. We had the shadow under it, the fowls of the heaven. We had dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all of the flesh, and fed it. Daniel 4:12. So he's saying God made clouds for shadow, that we could be cool. He made trees to shadow things. He made trees for fertilizer. He made trees to make air. So the air that you and I breathe was made by God, believe it or not. The air comes from the trees and from the vegetation. That it is exactly, I can't tell you the computation of it, but I can tell you it's a fact that air from that tree is exactly what we need to breathe. Otherwise, we couldn't breathe H2O. We couldn't breathe it. Now, water makes air, and air comes out of the trees, and it's in the water. And air is something that you and I have to have in order to live. And God made that to come about. So I know a man in Christ about 14 years ago. Paul says this, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether of the body I cannot tell. God knoweth such a one, and caught up into the third heaven. So Paul says we got a heaven in front of us, and God's in a heaven, and Paul got caught up into the third heaven, 2 Corinthians 12 and 2. Note now the work of the first 6 days. The first day was the creation of light. That's where God lives, in the light heaven, where the expanse of light is. We see the heavens as dark, but in that darkness there is light above that. Now God took this day down here and he separated the darkness from the light so that we could have light that lights the earth. This birth was energized with the earth rotating on its axis. Also began at this time. Both energy and matter were now present in space. Mass, time was the framework. The three basic types of force fields were now in effect. We had the gravitational pull of the force between two objects. We have electronic and magnetic, the force between the electronic and the nucleus of an atom. This is the little bitty atom that you have to have a microscope to look at it. Is the same exact system as the whole great big system that we live in. If you please, the world is an atom to God. It's one of the smallest planets out here. And it's like an atom to God. And inside of that atom is everything you and I see and all that we see. And it's massive to us. But also if you take an microscope, an electron microscope, and get down to the micro basics of micrology and looking at that atom, that little atom is a world under its own self. And it has worlds in it. And it's something we can't even see with the naked eye. So how small is this earth actually to God? How actually small is this earth to God? It's like a microchip to God. Yet God's interested in the microchip. But we see it had been some years before God had come down and looked around on this earth. When he came down and found Noah, it had been some time. So he came down to see how his earth was doing. And as he looked around, he saw wickedness. And he looked further and he saw wickedness. And he looked further and he saw wickedness. And he looked further and he saw wickedness. All of a sudden, just when he said, I think I will destroy mankind, they're destroying my earth. They are destroying my earth. I think I'll destroy mankind that I have made. And he finds Noah. And that Noah was responsible for 7 other people. So that made 8 people on this earth that God could spare. So he had Noah build this ark. He gave him 125 years of grace to build the ark. And he builds the ark in 125 years. I'm sure he has a workforce of thousands building the ark. Thousands. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know they were building the safety that 8 people were going to float out of here on, and they were all going to die because they were laughing at the man they were working for and saying, he's foolish, he's crazy, what is he building this thing? We've never had rain. It hadn't rained for 1656 years, I believe. You'll have to look that up to believe my quote there. And it was something like 1656 years after creation that the flood came. And so it had never rained. They had never seen rain. They hadn't seen water flood the earth. They had seen the ocean, but they knew the ocean wasn't going to come up and float that big old ark. So here was the ark they're building, and they went ahead and did what Noah paid them to do. And so they built the ark. And that's how that came about. And now we see the first, second, and the heaven that the angels live in. and the departed saints live in. There is a heaven the departed saints live in. I knew a man, he said, about 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell. God knoweth such an one caught up to the third heaven. 2 Corinthians 12:2. Note that now the work of the first 6 days, the first day was creation, light. And this was a spirit-moved, vibrated upon the earth from this omniscient, vibrating energy source began to flow over the energy waves and wave of heat and sound and magnetism, thus created the universe was energized. And the earth rotating on its axis also began at this time both energy, matter, and the presence of space, mass, time framework. The three basic types of force fields were now in effect. The gravitational pull, the force between two objects. The electronic magnetic, the force between the electron and the nucleus of an atom. And the nuclear, that's the force between the proton and the neutron within the atom. Here's this one little atom that has all of the subject matter to make a bomb, to blow up. And then some mistakenly believe that the Holy Spirit first came to the earth at Pentecost. Well, in Acts 2, and he will leave at the rapture, but he is pictured in the second verse in the Bible. The second day, the separation of the waters, and these waters was in two forms. Regular land-based water in the shallow ocean, rivers, or lake beds. Then there was atmospheric water in the form of invisible, translucent vapor, which was in the heavens. Remember, it was over the earth. And the earth was watered daily by the dew that came, that was caused by this particular type of creation. And then the third day we see the creation of plant life, verses 1:19 through 13, and the lush green vegetation, the exotic flowers, and now grace is newly emerging dry ground. And these verses alone totally refute the harmful doctrine of theistic evolution, which says that life began eons ago from a globe of scum floating on some remote ocean surface. But to the contrary, Moses tells us life was supernatural, created on the third day of creation, and began on dry ground. This was God's deal, making life. Now, the fourth day of creation, the sun, the moon, and the stars, 1:14 through 19. On the first day, God created physical light. He now creates special light sources. These heavenly bodies were the function in a threefold manner. A sign they teach and remind men of God's creative work. Every day, those were put there for a reminder that God did it. He put these in there. When I consider the heavens and thy handiwork, the moon. Hey, the moon rules the tides. And the moon was put there by God. And it was put there to do something only God could do. Mankind couldn't make anything to resemble the effects of the moon on the tide. And the stars. Thou hast ordained, Psalm 8:3. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, to that they without excuse, Romans 1:19 through 20. They, the people of this earth, you and I, are without excuse because God has shown us all that he has shown us. Starting from the creation, mankind could see it took the hand of God to make these things so that we could have the summarizing statement that we have in the Bible, summarizing the beginning of what God created on the earth, and tells us what God did and tells us what God is going to do and what he is doing and how he is holding it all by his word. He spoke it out there, and his word is holding it all together. So we see the third heaven, the second heaven, and the first heaven, which is where the birds fly, and the earthly heaven, the little heaven that we see. We see the seasons. We see the lights. We see the priority. We see the preservation. We see the purity of it. We see the planet Earth. Nowadays we can see it from a telescope. From the outside of the earth we can see the earth in its form. Man has a visual sense of what the earth looks like from space. The person and the Trinity wrapped up in human flesh. We are a body, a soul, and a spirit. That's like the earth in the world, in the air around us, and the air around us and the earth in a heavenly body, a planet by itself, only planet by itself, like it is. And this was a chosen planet that God used for this. And he made preservation for it. He made it to where it would self-exist, and it will exist. Everybody on this earth, mankind, has tried every way under the sun to ruin it, to spoil it, to pollute it, to kill it. And we've done that. We've done a pretty good job of that. We've done a real good job of doing that. Now we're trying to get it back. Well, you can't get back some things that you've sent out. They won't come back. It said, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights. James 1:17. The fifth day, the creation, was the fish and the fowls. If we didn't have the fish and the fowls, we wouldn't have the food that we have. Did you know that we get, I understand, and I'm not too smart at it in one sense of the word, that 20% of all the food in all of the world comes from the rivers and the lakes and the ocean. 20% is enough to put anything out of business if you took that 20% away. You take 20% of the fuel that's being used today around this earth and you'd shut the earth down. So what we see is the contrast here between the little tiny hummingbird to the massive blue supreme whale. It is generally known, but the blue sperm whale is larger and heavier than the modern 737 Boeing jet passenger airplane. It can reach a length of 110 feet and weigh 150 tons. This is the blue whale in the ocean that God created. Man thinks he's really something, that he made this 757 that'll fly on the earth. It wouldn't fly if God didn't make it fly. It doesn't fly by the wind up under it. It flies by the wind over it. And it's a very odd situation, one that's not completely understood by mankind, but God made it to work that way. It's the wind that flies over it. All right. The days of creation, we've got to get out of here because we're done. The first day was light, remember that? The second day was the firmament and water, and the third day was land and vegetation. Our time has come and gone. The lengths of these days are literal 24-hour days. Answer yes, because the numerical adjective used with the word day, Hebrew yom, indicates this. Moses believed it, Exodus 20, 11, 31 through 17. David believed it in Psalm 33, 9 through 6. Most Hebrew language scholars believe it because the Hebrew structure itself teaches it. The correlation of these days, the first 3 days provide the backdrop for the creation drama. The last 3 days divide the actual actors in the creation drama. The backdrop, light, firmament, and land. The actor first one was the sun, the moon, and the stars, day 4. Day 5 was the fowls and the fish. And day 6 was animal and man. The twofold account of these days was the floodlight account in Genesis 1, the general description of the creation of the universe. The chronological account, the spotlight from Genesis chapter 2 account, and the specific description of the creation of man in the topical account. Our time's come and gone. Would love to stay with you, but if I do these an hour, they won't get watched. It's hard to get people to watch a 30-minute one. Nowadays, people are 10 to 12 to 15-minute people. And so, but these are very interesting. They're interesting to me. I could sit here and go on for hour after hour after hour after hour after hour and go through the whole Old Testament, which I'd like to do. But I'm right now just to the 6th day of creation, where the land creatures and man were made. And so we can't go through it, and that's took 30 something minutes to do that. And so we've got to come to an end here. In Genesis 1 and 17, and the whole Bible backs up the whole series of God. It backs it up. So we got the whole series of God backed up by the whole Bible. Boy, boy, oh boy. You could probably find one of these books right here, Wilmington's Guide to the Bible. You can probably find one for as little as maybe as $19 or $20 on the internet. Mine is marked all the way through. I have studied this all the way through several times. I have marked different colors and different marks. And when I'm preaching or teaching, or when I'm doing a study, I look at these colors and these marks and these different things, and I go by how I mark them. And as I mark them, they come out to where I can see what I want to do. And I've studied through this book several times. I've been through this book. The majority of it, I have got a page or two that I haven't dove into yet, and I'm trying to get those pages filled in too. And so if you're going to study something, you need to study it all the way through. You need to study the whole thing, not just half of it, and not just what you like, but you need to study what you don't like. What you say, well, oh man, I don't get into all of that, these days and nights and hours and floods and all that thing, and these people's names and all of this and that. Yeah, you need to know it all. You need to get it all. You need to absorb a little bit of all of it so that you won't be in the dark. If you're talking with somebody that doesn't really know what they're talking about, you'll be able to cipher out what's true and what isn't true. And if you hadn't studied it for yourself, you won't be able to cipher out what's true and what isn't true. Who's a false prophet and who isn't a false prophet. Who's really got in it and who really didn't get in it. Well, our time's come and gone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.